Lila adjusted her worn leather hat, squinting against the gusts that carried the sharp scent of sagebrush and dust. A wildlife biologist with the Blackfeet Nation, she'd spent a decade tracking the rhythms of this land. Its herds, its seasons, its secrets. But today, something felt off. The prairie was too still, the air heavy with a tension she couldn't place. She'd been called out to this remote stretch of the Two Medicine River Valley by a rancher, Tom Hargrove, who'd reported a problem buffalo near his fence line. Lila knew Tom's gruff voice over the radio hid a grudging respect for the animals he claimed stole his grazing land. She expected another routine check, a stray bull tangled in wire, maybe, or a cow spooked by ATVs. But as her pickup rattled to a stop at the edge of a shallow canyon, her breath caught. There, silhouetted against the storm-darkened sky, stood a buffalo bull. Massive, unyielding, he was a monument of the plains. 6 feet at the shoulder, nearly 2,000 pounds of muscle and bone. His chestnut coat, thick and matted with dust, rippled in the wind, and his curved horns gleamed faintly in the fading sunlight. But it was his stillness that unnerved her. He stood rooted to the earth, head lowered, as if guarding something sacred. Blood streaked his flank, a dark smear against the woolly fur, and his left leg trembled slightly, betraying pain. Yet his eyes, deep, dark pools of resolve, held a spark of something Lila had never seen in an animal before. Intelligence. Purpose. "Lila, you seein' this?" Tom's voice broke her trance. He leaned against his truck, a wiry figure in faded denim, his weathered face creased with unease. "Ain't right. He's been standin' there for hours. Won't budge, even when I fired a warning shot." Lila frowned, her hand tightening on her binoculars. "You shot at him?" "Not at him," Tom muttered, kicking at the dirt. "Just to spook him. Didn't work. Damn thing just stared at me." She raised the binoculars, focusing on the buffalo's wounds. A deep gash ran along his side, likely from barbed wire or a predator's claw, though the latter seemed unlikely. His breathing was labored, each exhale a low, guttural huff that carried across the canyon. But he didn't flee, didn't charge, didn't even shift his weight. He stood over a patch of trampled grass, his massive head lowered toward something hidden in the shadows of a rocky outcrop. "Stay here," Lila said, slinging her pack over her shoulder. Her heart thudded, not from fear but from a strange pull toward the animal. She'd studied buffalo her whole life, learned their patterns from her grandfather, a Blackfeet elder who called them thinii, the lifeblood of the plains. They were resilient, powerful, the heartbeat of this land. But this one was different. His stillness wasn't surrender, it was defiance. The canyon sloped gently downward, its walls etched with centuries of wind and rain. The air grew colder as Lila descended, the scent of damp earth mixing with the musky tang of the buffalo. She moved slowly, her boots crunching on gravel, her eyes locked on the bull. He shifted slightly, his head swinging toward her, and she froze. His gaze pinned her, not with aggression but with a weight that felt almost human. Then, impossibly, he took a step toward her. Lila's pulse raced. Buffalo didn't approach humans. They fled or fought, their instincts honed by centuries of survival. But this one limped forward, his wounded leg dragging, and let out a low, rumbling vocalization. Not a threat, but a call. It was a sound she'd never heard, urgent and plaintive, like a plea. "Easy, big guy," she whispered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. She crouched, keeping her movements slow, her eyes scanning the ground where he'd stood. Something glinted in the grass, a flash of metal, half buried in the dirt. A trap. A piece of debris? She edged closer, the buffalo watching her every move. Then she heard it. A faint, guttural snarl, weak but unmistakable, rising from the shadows beneath the outcrop. Lila's breath caught. She dropped to her knees, peering into the dim space where the buffalo had stood guard. There, curled in a hollow of rock and grass, was a tiger. A tiger. Its striped coat was matted with blood and dirt, its amber eyes half closed with exhaustion. A heavy steel cage, its door sprung open, lay tilted beside it, the chain link warped as if something massive had battered it. Lila's mind reeled. A tiger in Montana? It made no sense. The nearest zoo was hundreds of miles away, and even then, a cage like that suggested transport, poachers, maybe, or an illegal trade gone wrong. The tiger's chest rose and fell weakly, its breathing ragged, and Lila realized it was young, barely more than a cub, its paws oversized for its frail body. She looked back at the buffalo. He stood closer now, his massive head lowered, his eyes flicking between her and the tiger. He snorted softly, a cloud of steam rising from his nostrils in the chilly air. It hit her then, he wasn't just standing there. He was protecting the cub. This wounded giant, bleeding and limping, had stayed to guard an animal that didn't belong here, an animal that could have been his predator in another world. "Lila!" Tom's shout echoed from above. "What the hell's goin' on down there?" She waved him off, her focus on the buffalo. "Stay back, Tom. Call for help, wildlife rescue, sheriff, anyone." Her voice trembled with urgency, but her eyes never left the bull. He shifted again, his hoof pawing the ground, kicking up a cloud of dust that stung her eyes. The tiger whimpered, a small, broken sound, and the buffalo's ears twitched toward it. Lila's heart ached. The buffalo's wounds were severe. Blood dripped steadily now, pooling in the grass, but he refused to leave. She'd seen buffalo protect their calves, their herd, but this? This was something else. Compassion, maybe. Or something deeper, something she couldn't name yet. She reached into her pack for her radio, her hands shaking as she called for a veterinary team. The storm was closing in, the wind carrying the first sharp bite of rain. They didn't have much time. As she spoke into the radio, describing the scene, the buffalo took another step toward her. She froze, her breath catching. He was close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his massive frame, smell the earthy musk of his coat. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world fell away, the wind, the storm, the impossible tiger cub. There was only this creature, this monument of the prairie, asking her to understand. Then, from the hollow, the tiger cub let out another weak snarl, and the buffalo's head snapped toward it. He lowered his horns, not in threat but in vigilance, his body a shield against the gathering storm. Lila's throat tightened. Whatever had brought this tiger here, whatever had broken that cage, this buffalo had chosen to stay. To protect. To fight. She didn't know why yet. She didn't know how a buffalo and a tiger had crossed paths in this windswept corner of the world. But as the first raindrops fell, heavy and cold against her skin, Lila knew one thing. This was no ordinary buffalo. And this was no ordinary story. The radio crackled with the rescue team's response, their voices faint against the rising wind. Lila stood, her eyes locked on the buffaloes, and made a silent promise. She would save them both, the bull and the cub, or die trying. But as she took a step toward the hollow, a faint sound rose from the shadows, not from the tiger but from something else, something buried deeper in the grass. A human voice, barely a whisper, calling for help. The rain began to fall in earnest, sharp and cold, drumming against Lila Whitefeather's hat as she crouched near the rocky outcrop. The buffalo bull, whom she'd already begun to think of as Thunderheart, a name borrowed from her grandfather's stories, stood resolute, his massive frame a dark silhouette against the storm's gray veil. His blood-streaked flank glistened under the rain, and his labored breaths sent clouds of steam into the air, mingling with the scent of wet sagebrush and churned earth. The tiger cub, curled in the hollow beneath the outcrop, whimpered again, its amber eyes flickering with fading strength. But it was the other sound, the faint, human whisper from the grass, that sent a jolt through Lila's spine. "Lila, you hear that?" Tom Hargrove's voice cracked with unease as he scrambled down the canyon slope, his boots slipping on wet gravel. He clutched a flashlight, its beam cutting through the dusk, revealing the warped steel cage beside the cub. "What's a damn tiger doing out here? And that sounds like someone's hurt." "Stay back, Tom," Lila said, her voice low but firm. She held up a hand, her eyes locked on Thunderheart. The buffalo's ears twitched, his head swinging toward the whisper, then back to her. His gaze was steady, almost imploring, as if urging her to act. She'd seen buffalo protect their own, but this, guarding a foreign creature and now, possibly, a human, was beyond instinct. It was deliberate. Purposeful. She edged closer to the hollow, her boots sinking into the muddy grass. The rain plastered her braid to her neck, and the wind howled, carrying the distant rumble of thunder. Thunderheart shifted, his hoof pawing the ground, kicking up a spray of mud. He let out a low, rumbling vocalization, not a threat but a warning, his eyes fixed on the spot where the whisper had come from. Lila's heart pounded. She trusted animals more than most people, but a wounded, 2,000-pound buffalo was unpredictable. Yet something in his posture, the way he angled his body to shield the hollow, told her he wasn't the danger here. "Help!" The whisper came again, faint but unmistakable, a woman's voice, raw with desperation. Lila dropped to her knees, peering into the tangled grass beyond the tiger cub. There, half hidden by a clump of sagebrush, lay a woman, her face pale and streaked with dirt, her clothes torn. A jagged wound ran across her forearm, blood mixing with the rain. Her eyes fluttered, struggling to focus on Lila. "Hang on," Lila said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. She glanced at Thunderheart, who stood like a sentinel, his massive head lowered, horns glinting wetly. He snorted softly, his breath warm against the cold air, as if acknowledging her presence. She spoke into her radio, her words clipped. "Rescue team, we've got a human casualty. Female, injured, conscious but weak. Hurry." Tom's flashlight swept over the scene, illuminating the woman's face. She looked young, maybe mid-20s, with dark hair matted to her skull. Beside her, the tiger cub stirred, its paws twitching as it tried to lift its head. The cage nearby was a wreck, its door bent outward, as if Thunderheart had rammed it open. Lila's mind raced. A tiger cub, a wounded woman, a buffalo standing guard. What had happened here? "Tom, get me the first aid kit from my truck," Lila said, her eyes flicking between the woman and the buffalo. Tom hesitated, his gaze darting to Thunderheart. "He won't hurt you," she added, though she wasn't entirely sure. She'd seen buffalo charge without warning, but this one seemed to understand the stakes. He hadn't moved since she'd approached, his focus split between the cub and the woman. Tom scrambled back up the slope, cursing under his breath as the rain intensified. Lila knelt beside the woman, checking her pulse, weak but steady. "Can you hear me?" she asked. "What's your name?" The woman's lips moved, her voice barely a whisper. "Sarah. I'm Sarah. The cub. They were taking it. I tried to stop them." Lila's stomach twisted. Poachers. Or worse. She'd heard whispers of illegal wildlife trafficking in the region, exotic animals smuggled through remote routes to avoid detection. But a tiger? In Montana. It was unheard of. She glanced at the cub, its ribs visible beneath its matted fur, and then at Thunderheart. His wounds were worse than she'd thought, blood seeped steadily from the gash on his flank, and his left leg trembled with each step. Yet he stood firm, his deep bellows resonating through the canyon, a sound that seemed to anchor the chaos. "Who did this?" Lila asked, pressing a cloth from her pack against Sarah's wound to slow the bleeding. "Who hurt you? And the cub?" Sarah's eyes fluttered shut, her voice fading. "Men. Truck. They shot at him." She gestured weakly toward Thunderheart. He saved us." Lila's breath caught. She looked at the buffalo, his massive shoulders hunched against the rain, his eyes locked on the cub. Bullet wounds. She hadn't seen them in the dim light, but now, squinting through the downpour, she spotted two small, dark holes near his shoulder, hidden by his thick coat. Her heart sank. This wasn't just a random act of compassion. Thunderheart had fought for them, taken bullets to protect a creature and a human he didn't know. The roar of an approaching vehicle cut through the storm. Headlights pierced the rain, and Lila recognized the wildlife rescue van, followed by a sheriff's SUV. The team spilled out, Dr. Elena Martinez, a veterinarian with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, and Sheriff Dan Carver, a grizzled man who'd seen every kind of trouble in these parts. "What in God's name is going on?" Dan called, his boots splashing through the mud as he approached. He froze when he saw Thunderheart, his hand instinctively moving to his holster. "That bull's wounded. Dangerous." "He's not the problem," Lila snapped, standing to block his path. "He's protecting them, the woman and the tiger cub. We need to stabilize them, now. Elena pushed past Dan, her medical bag slung over her shoulder. She took one look at the scene, the buffalo, the cub, the woman, and whistled low. This is a first. A buffalo playing hero for a tiger? And a human. She knelt beside the cub, her hands gentle but swift as she checked its vitals. Malnourished, dehydrated, maybe sedated. Looks like it's been through hell. Lila nodded, her eyes on Thunderheart. He's hurt bad, Elena. Bullet wounds, maybe more. But he won't let us near the cub or the woman unless we move carefully. Elena glanced at the buffalo, her expression softening. He's a guardian, isn't he? I've seen animals protect their own, but this... She shook her head, pulling out a syringe. I'll sedate the cub to move it safely, but we'll need to work around him. Dan frowned, his hand still near his gun. You're telling me this buffalo took on armed men? For a tiger and some woman? Sounds like a tall tale. It's not, Lila said, her voice sharp. Look at him. Look at what he's doing. She pointed to Thunderheart, who stood motionless now, his eyes tracking Elena's movements. He let out a soft huff, his head lowering slightly, as if granting permission. Lila's chest tightened. She'd studied animal behavior for years, written papers on buffalo social structures, but this defied everything she knew. This was empathy, raw and profound. Elena worked quickly, administering a mild sedative to the cub. It whimpered once, then went limp, its breathing steadying. Lila turned to Sarah, who was conscious but fading, her eyes fixed on Thunderheart. He charged them, she murmured. The men, they were going to take the cub, sell it. I followed them, tried to free it. Lila's jaw clenched. She pictured it, Sarah, desperate to save the cub, breaking the cage open, Thunderheart, grazing nearby, hearing the gunfire, the cub's cries, and charging into the fray. The men must have fled, leaving their prize behind. But why had Thunderheart stayed? Why risk his life for a creature so alien to his world? The rescue team set up a stretcher for Sarah, their voices hushed as they worked under Thunderheart's watchful gaze. Lila stepped closer to him, her hands raised, palms open. You're a brave one, she whispered. We're going to help them. And you. His ears flicked, and for a moment, she swore he understood her. But as the team lifted Sarah onto the stretcher, Thunderheart's head snapped up. He let out a deep, resonant bellow that echoed through the canyon, his hoof striking the ground. Lila froze, her heart racing. His wounds were bleeding heavily now, his strength fading, but his eyes burned with resolve. He wasn't done protecting. Elena looked up from the cub, her face grim. Lila, he's in bad shape. We need to get him to a vet station, but he won't leave them. Then we take them all, Lila said, her voice unwavering. She turned to Dan, get your deputies to search the area. Tire tracks, shell casings, anything. Whoever did this is still out there. Dan nodded, his skepticism giving way to urgency. All right. But this story's gonna raise hell when it gets out. A buffalo, a tiger, and a poaching ring? People won't believe it. They'll believe it when they see him, Lila said, glancing at Thunderheart. The rain had plastered his coat to his frame, revealing the sheer power of his body, even wounded. But it was his eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, that held her. He wasn't just an animal. He was a force, a testament to something greater. As the team prepared to move Sarah and the cub, Lila noticed something glinting in the mud near the cage. She knelt, brushing away the dirt, and found a small, engraved tag, half buried. It read, Property of Horizon Exotics. Her blood ran cold. Horizon Exotics was a name she'd heard in hushed whispers, a shadowy outfit linked to a legal wildlife trade. This wasn't just a random act. It was part of something bigger. Thunderheart bellowed again, softer this time, his head lowering toward the cub as Elena lifted it onto a stretcher. Lila stood, her mind racing. Who was Sarah? How had she gotten tangled in this? And why had Thunderheart, a creature of the plains, risked everything to save a tiger cub and a stranger? The answers were out there, in the storm-swept prairie, and Lila would find them. But first, she had to save the guardian who'd started it all. The storm raged on, its wind slicing through the Montana Canyon like a blade, carrying sheets of rain that stung Lila Whitefeather's face. Thunderheart stood resolute, his massive frame a bulwark against the tempest, his chestnut coat slick with water and blood. The gash on his flank oozed steadily, and the bullet wounds near his shoulder glistened darkly. Yet he held his ground, his deep eyes fixed on the tiger cub and Sarah, now being tended by the rescue team. The cub lay sedated on a stretcher, its frail body dwarfed by Thunderheart's shadow, while Sarah, pale and shivering, was stabilized on another stretcher nearby. But Lila's heart pounded with a new urgency. The faint human whisper had stopped, and Thunderheart's restless pawing suggested he sensed something she couldn't. "Lila, we've got to move them now," Dr. Elena Martinez called, her voice cutting through the storm's roar. She secured a blanket over the tiger cub, her hands steady despite the chaos. "The cub's stable, but Sarah needs a hospital, and this buffalo, he's losing too much blood." Lila nodded, her gaze locked on Thunderheart. His ears twitched, catching every sound: the clatter of the rescue team's equipment, the distant rumble of thunder, the faint whine of the wind. He let out a low, resonant bellow, his massive head swinging toward the hollow where Sarah had been found. Lila followed his gaze, her stomach tightening. Something was still out there, hidden in the shadows of the outcrop, and Thunderheart wasn't moving until it was safe. "Dan, shine your light over there," Lila said, pointing to the tangled grass beyond the cage. Sheriff Dan Carver, his face grim under his rain-soaked hat, swung his flashlight's beam across the muddy ground. The light caught a glint of metal, then another, a second cage, smaller, half buried under a pile of rocks and sagebrush. Lila's breath caught. Another animal. Or something worse. She took a step forward, her boots sinking into the mud, and Thunderheart shifted, his hoof striking the ground with a wet thud. His eyes met hers, urgent but not threatening, as if guiding her to the spot. "Easy, big guy," she whispered, her heart racing. She'd never been this close to a wild buffalo, close enough to feel the heat of his breath, to see the rain pooling in the crevices of his curved horns. His presence was overwhelming, a force of nature, yet his restraint, his trust, felt like a gift. "Elena, keep an eye on him," Lila said, her voice low. She crept toward the second cage, her hands trembling as she brushed away the debris. The cage was smaller than the first, its bars bent and rusted, and inside, curled in a tight ball, was another tiger cub. Smaller than the first, its black stripes barely visible under a layer of mud. It lay motionless, its sides barely rising. Lila's throat tightened. It was alive, but just barely. "Oh God," she whispered, her fingers fumbling with the cage's warped door. The lock was broken, likely from Thunderheart's charge, but the cub was trapped under a collapsed section of the cage. She glanced back at the buffalo. He stood closer now, his head lowered, his deep bellow vibrating through her chest. He'd known. Somehow, he'd known there was another life to protect. "Dan, help me," Lila called, her voice sharp with urgency. Dan scrambled over, his flashlight shaking as he took in the scene. "Another one. How the hell?" "No time," Lila cut him off. "We need to lift this." She pointed to the crumpled metal pinning the cub. It was heavy, rusted, and lodged in the muddy earth, but they had to move it. The cub's breathing was shallow, its tiny body shivering in the cold rain. Thunderheart let out another bellow, louder this time, his hoof pawing the ground as if urging them to hurry. Lila and Dan gripped the cage, their hands slipping on the wet metal. The wind howled, and the rain blinded them, but Lila's focus was razor-sharp. She could feel Thunderheart's eyes on her, his presence a steady anchor in the storm. "On 3, she said, her muscles tensing. 1, 2, 3. They heaved, the cage groaning as it shifted an inch, then another. Lila's arms burned, her boots sliding in the mud, but she didn't stop. The cub whimpered, a faint, broken sound, and Thunderheart responded with a soft huff, his massive head nudging closer. Lila's heart leapt. His movement could be dangerous, but it wasn't aggression. He was helping. His broad forehead pressed against the cage, his strength adding to theirs, and with a final heave, the metal lifted free. Lila dropped to her knees, scooping the cub into her arms. It was lighter than she'd expected, its body frail and cold, but its eyes fluttered open, meeting hers with a flicker of life. "You're okay," she whispered, cradling it against her chest. She looked up at Thunderheart, who stood over her, his breath warm against her face. His eyes softened, a glint of relief in their depths, and for a moment, the storm seemed to fade, the world narrowing to this impossible bond between them. "Elena, we've got another cub," Lila called, her voice shaking with adrenaline. Elena rushed over, her medical bag swinging, and took the cub, her hands swift as she checked its vitals. "This one's worse off," she said, her face grim. "Hypothermia, maybe internal injuries. We need to get them both to the vet station now." Lila stood, her legs trembling, and faced Thunderheart. His wounds were bleeding heavily now, the rain washing blood into the mud, but he didn't waver. He lowered his head, his nose brushing the ground near the first cub's stretcher, as if checking on it. Lila's chest ached with awe. He'd taken bullets, fought off armed men, and stayed to protect not one but two cubs and a woman, defying every instinct of his kind. "Dan, get the team to prep a transport for him," Lila said, her voice steady despite the tears burning her eyes. "He's coming with us." Dan hesitated, his hand still near his gun. "Lila, he's a wild animal. Wounded, unpredictable. You really think we can move him?" "He's not just an animal," she said, her voice fierce. "He's the reason they're alive. Look at him." She gestured to Thunderheart, who stood calm now, his eyes tracking the cubs as Elena secured them. "He trusts us. We owe him." Dan shook his head, muttering something about crazy biologists, but he radioed the team. The rescue van's rear doors swung open, and the team began setting up a reinforced enclosure for Thunderheart. Lila approached him slowly, her hands raised. "We're going to help you," she said softly. "You've done enough. Let us take it from here." Thunderheart's ears flicked, and he let out a low, rumbling sound, almost like a sigh. He took a step toward the van, his limp more pronounced now, his strength fading. Lila's heart clenched. She knew the risk he was taking, trusting humans after what he'd endured. She walked beside him, her hand hovering near his flank, not touching but close enough to feel his warmth. The rain battered them both, but for a moment, it was just her and Thunderheart, moving together through the storm. The team worked fast, loading Sarah and the cubs into the van. Thunderheart followed, his hooves crunching on the gravel, his head held high despite the pain. Lila climbed in beside him, her hand resting on the edge of his enclosure. His eyes met hers again, and she felt a surge of connection, a silent pact forged in the chaos of the night. As the van's doors closed and the engine roared to life, Elena leaned over, her voice low. "Lila, this buffalo, he's something else. I've never seen an animal act like this. He's not just protecting them. He's choosing them." Lila nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She looked at Thunderheart, his massive form filling the enclosure, his breathing heavy but steady. The cubs lay nearby, their tiny bodies wrapped in blankets, and Sarah, now conscious, whispered thanks from her stretcher. But Lila's mind was already racing ahead. Who had brought these cubs here? Why had Sarah risked her life? And what drove Thunderheart to sacrifice so much for creatures so unlike him? The van lurched forward, headlights cutting through the rain. Lila's hand rested on the enclosure, inches from Thunderheart's coat. She didn't know the answers yet, but she knew one thing: this buffalo had changed everything. And as the storm raged outside, a new question burned in her mind. What else was out there, waiting to be uncovered? The veterinary station hummed with urgency, its fluorescent lights casting stark shadows across the concrete floor. Thunderheart stood in a makeshift enclosure, his massive frame filling the space, his chestnut coat matted with dried blood and mud. The rain had stopped, but the storm's aftertaste lingered in the air, a damp, earthy scent mingling with antiseptic and hay. Lila Whitefeather leaned against the enclosure's railing, her eyes tracing the buffalo's slow breaths, each one steadier than the last. Dr. Elena Martinez worked nearby, her hands swift as she stitched the gash on Thunderheart's flank, while the 2 tiger cubs slept in heated crates, their frail bodies wrapped in blankets. Sarah, the injured woman, rested in a nearby clinic, her condition stable but her story still a mystery. Lila's fingers tightened around the engraved tag she'd found in the mud, property of Horizon Exotics. The words burned in her mind, a clue to the chaos that had unfolded in the canyon. Thunderheart let out a low huff, his dark eyes meeting hers, and she felt that same pull she'd sensed in the storm, a connection that defied explanation. His wounds were severe. 2 bullet grazes, a deep laceration, and bruising from his charge against the cage. But he stood tall, his presence a quiet testament to his resilience. Elena had called him a miracle, and Lila couldn't disagree. "You're a tough one," Lila murmured, her voice soft. Thunderheart's ears flicked, and he shifted, his hoof scraping the floor. The sound was grounding, a reminder of his power even in recovery. His coat, once dulled by blood and dirt, was beginning to regain its luster, the rich chestnut catching the light. Lila's chest ached with a mix of awe and determination. She'd saved him, but he'd saved others first. Now, she needed to know why. Elena finished the last stitch, wiping her hands on her scrubs. "He's stable," she said, her voice tinged with exhaustion. "The bullets didn't hit anything vital, thank God. But he needs rest, antibiotics, and time. Those cubs, too, they're malnourished, sedated, probably smuggled from halfway across the world." Lila nodded, her gaze drifting to the cubs. The smaller one, barely conscious when they'd found it, was breathing steadily now, its tiny paws twitching in sleep. The other, slightly stronger, had opened its amber eyes briefly, locking onto Thunderheart as if recognizing its protector. Lila's mind churned. Horizon Exotics. Poaching. A woman risking her life. And a buffalo who'd fought for them all. Sheriff Dan Carver pushed through the station's doors, his boots heavy on the floor. He carried a tablet, his face grim. "Got something," he said, holding it out to Lila. "Ran that tag through the system. Horizon Exotics is bad news, suspected in illegal wildlife trafficking across 3 states. No convictions, though. They're slippery." Lila took the tablet, scanning the report. Grainy photos showed crates loaded onto unmarked trucks, blurred faces of men in remote locations. Her stomach twisted. "They were moving the cubs," she said. "Sarah said she tried to stop them. But how'd she end up out there?" Dan shrugged, his eyes flicking to Thunderheart. "She's awake now, talking a bit. Says she's a grad student, studying wildlife trafficking. Followed a tip about a drop-off near 2 Medicine, got in over her head. Found the cubs in a truck, tried to free them, and all hell broke loose." Lila's jaw tightened. She pictured Sarah, alone in the dark, prying open a cage while armed men closed in. And Thunderheart, grazing nearby, hearing the gunfire, the cubs' cries, and charging into the fray. "Those men shot at him," she said, her voice low. "He took bullets for them." Dan shook his head, his skepticism softening. "Never seen anything like it. A buffalo going up against humans for a couple of tiger cubs? That's one for the books." Elena joined them, her face thoughtful. "It's not just instinct," she said. "I've been studying animal behavior for 20 years, and this is something else. He's showing empathy, maybe even cognition beyond what we've documented in buffalo. We need to get researchers out here." Lila's heart quickened. She'd written papers on buffalo social structures, their role as a keystone species, but Thunderheart's actions were unprecedented. Protecting a foreign species, a human, at such cost, it could rewrite what they knew about animal intelligence. But first, she needed to ensure his safety. The station's phone rang, and a volunteer answered, her voice rising with excitement. Lila caught snippets, news crew, wildlife officials, national coverage. She exchanged a glance with Elena. "This is getting big," Elena said. "A buffalo saving tiger cubs? People are going to lose their minds." Lila's mind raced. Public attention could help, funding for Thunderheart's care, pressure on Horizon Exotics, but it could also complicate things. Crowds, cameras, bureaucracy. She looked at Thunderheart, his steady gaze grounding her. "We keep him safe," she said firmly. "No matter what." By morning, the station was buzzing. A wildlife rescue team from Billings arrived, along with a biologist from Montana State University, Dr. Marcus Reed, who specialized in animal cognition. He watched Thunderheart with wide eyes, scribbling notes. "This is extraordinary," he said, his voice hushed. "If we can document his behavior, it could shift how we view buffalo. Maybe even spark new conservation policies." Lila nodded, but her focus was on Sarah. She slipped into the clinic, where Sarah sat propped up on a cot, her arm bandaged. Her dark eyes were haunted but clear. "You're the one who found us," she said, her voice hoarse. "Thank you." Lila sat beside her, the engraved tag heavy in her pocket. "Tell me what happened," she said gently. "Everything." Sarah's story came in fragments. She'd been tracking Horizon Exotics for months, following leads about their smuggling routes. A contact had tipped her off about a drop near 2 Medicine, a truck carrying exotic animals for a black market buyer. She'd found the truck at dusk, the cubs sedated in cages, and tried to free them. But the men caught her, beat her, and left her for dead. The cubs' cries had drawn Thunderheart, who'd been grazing nearby. "He came out of nowhere," Sarah said, her voice breaking. "This wall of muscle and horns. He rammed the truck, broke the cages. The men shot at him, but he didn't stop. He stood over me, over the cubs, until they ran." Lila's throat tightened. She pictured Thunderheart, blood streaming down his flank, facing down armed men. "Why didn't he run?" she asked, almost to herself. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know. But when I was lying there, bleeding, he looked at me. Like he knew I needed him." Lila returned to the station, her mind heavy with Sarah's words. Thunderheart was eating now, his massive jaws working through a pile of hay, his strength slowly returning. She approached his enclosure, her hand resting on the railing. "You're something else," she whispered. He lifted his head, his eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, she felt he understood. Not just her words, but her gratitude, her resolve. Outside, the news vans were arriving, their cameras trained on the station. A reporter cornered Lila, shoving a microphone in her face. "Is it true a buffalo saved a woman and 2 tiger cubs? What's the story here?" Lila hesitated, her eyes flicking to Thunderheart. "It's true," she said. "He's a hero. But there's more to this. Poaching, trafficking. We need to find out who did this." The reporter's eyes lit up, sensing a scoop. Lila stepped away, her focus returning to Thunderheart. The tag in her pocket felt heavier now, a key to unraveling the mystery. Horizon Exotics wasn't just a name, it was a network, and they'd come close to succeeding. But Thunderheart had stopped them, and Lila would make sure their story didn't end here. As the day wore on, Marcus and Elena proposed a plan. Move Thunderheart to a nearby wildlife sanctuary, where he could recover fully. The cubs would go to a specialized facility for exotics, with hopes of rehabilitation. But Lila's mind was on the bigger picture. Sarah's story, Thunderheart's actions, they were a call to action. She contacted a friend at the Blackfeet Tribal Council, proposing a sanctuary on tribal land, a place where Thunderheart could thrive and inspire. The idea was bold, but it felt right. That evening, Lila stood by Thunderheart's enclosure, the station quiet except for his steady breathing. She reached through the bars, her fingers brushing his woolly coat for the first time. It was warm, coarse, alive. He didn't pull away, his eyes softening as he nudged her hand, a gentle gesture that felt like trust. "We're not done yet," she whispered. "Not by a long shot." But as she turned to leave, her phone buzzed with a message from Dan. Tire tracks had been found near the canyon, leading to an abandoned warehouse. And inside, a single clue, a manifest listing dozens of animals, including the cubs, and a destination that made Lila's blood run cold, an international buyer. The fight was far from over. The Montana sunrise painted the prairie in hues of gold and rose, its light filtering through the cottonwoods that lined the edge of the Blackfeet Nation's new wildlife sanctuary. Lila Whitefeather stood at the fence, her breath visible in the crisp morning air, watching Thunderheart graze in the open field. His chestnut coat gleamed, the wounds on his flank now healed into faint scars, a testament to his survival. The buffalo's massive shoulders rolled with each step, his curved horns catching the dawn's glow, and his deep, rhythmic bellows echoed across the valley. He was a symbol of resilience, a living monument to the plains, and Lila felt a quiet pride knowing he was safe. Weeks had passed since the chaotic night in the canyon. The two tiger cubs, now named Ember and Ash, were thriving at a specialized exotic animal rehabilitation center in Colorado, their strength returning with proper care. Sarah, fully recovered, had returned to her graduate studies, but not before vowing to continue her fight against wildlife trafficking. The story of Thunderheart's heroism had spread like wildfire, capturing headlines across the country. Buffalo saves tiger cubs and woman from poachers. News crews had descended on the veterinary station, and social media buzzed with Thunderheart's image, his towering form shielding the cubs, his eyes fierce yet compassionate. Lila's proposal to the Blackfeet Tribal Council had borne fruit. The sanctuary, a sprawling 500 acres of restored prairie, was established as a haven for Thunderheart and other wildlife, with plans to integrate a small herd to ensure his social needs were met. But the road hadn't been easy. Bureaucratic hurdles, land rights, funding, permits, had tested Lila's patience. She'd spent late nights drafting proposals, meeting with tribal elders, and fielding calls from wildlife organizations eager to study Thunderheart's behavior. Dr. Marcus Reed, the cognition expert, had secured a grant to research buffalo intelligence, citing Thunderheart's actions as a potential breakthrough. "He's rewriting what we know about empathy in animals," Marcus had said, his excitement palpable. Lila's own transformation was quieter but profound. She'd always loved the land, guided by her grandfather's teachings about Thinii, the buffalo as the heart of the plains. But Thunderheart had awakened something deeper in her, a sense of purpose that went beyond science. She'd been a loner, content with her fieldwork and solitude, but his trust had changed her. She saw the world differently now, through the lens of his courage, his choice to protect the vulnerable. Every time she visited the sanctuary, she felt it, a bond that transcended species, rooted in mutual respect. Today, Thunderheart was set to meet his new herd, a small group of buffalo relocated from a nearby conservation program. Lila watched as the transport truck arrived, its doors opening to release 5 cows and a young bull. They stepped onto the prairie, their hooves sinking into the soft earth, their snorts mingling with the scent of sagebrush. Thunderheart lifted his head, his ears twitching, and let out a deep, resonant bellow that seemed to ripple through the grass. The herd responded, their heads turning toward him, and Lila's heart swelled. He wasn't alone anymore. Dr. Elena Martinez joined her at the fence, her face lit with a rare smile. "He's home," she said, nodding toward Thunderheart. "Look at him. You'd never know he was half dead a month ago." Lila nodded, her throat tight. "He's more than that. He's a teacher." She thought of the cubs, of Sarah, of the way Thunderheart had stood against armed men, his body a shield. His story had sparked a movement, petitions for stricter anti-poaching laws, donations pouring into the sanctuary, and a growing public fascination with buffalo as more than just icons of the West. The Blackfeet Nation had embraced the project, with elders weaving Thunderheart's tale into their storytelling, calling him a guardian spirit. But the fight wasn't over. Sheriff Dan Carver's investigation into Horizon Exotics had uncovered a web of corruption, smugglers linked to international buyers, operating through remote warehouses like the one near 2 Medicine. The manifest Lila had found listed dozens of animals, from tigers to parrots, destined for private collectors. Sarah's testimony had helped, but the ringleaders remained at large, their network elusive. Lila had testified before a state wildlife committee, her voice steady as she described Thunderheart's sacrifice, urging for tougher regulations. The committee was listening, and a bill was in the works, a small victory, but a start. As the herd approached Thunderheart, he took a step forward, his massive head lowered in greeting. One cow, her coat a deep mahogany, nudged him gently, and he responded with a soft huff, their breaths mingling in the cool air. Lila's eyes stung with tears. She'd seen buffalo herds before, their unity a force of nature, but this felt personal. Thunderheart had chosen to protect, to trust, and now he was finding his place again. Marcus joined them, his notebook tucked under his arm. "We're setting up cameras to monitor his interactions," he said. "His behavior with the cubs, with Sarah, it's already challenging what we know. If he shows similar empathy with the herd, it could redefine buffalo cognition." Lila nodded, but her focus was on Thunderheart. She climbed over the fence, ignoring Elena's raised eyebrow, and walked slowly toward him. The herd parted, their eyes curious but calm, and Thunderheart turned to face her. His gaze was steady, the same spark of intelligence she'd seen that first night in the canyon. She reached out, her hand hovering near his flank, and he didn't pull away. Her fingers brushed his coat, warm and coarse, and he let out a low rumble, almost a purr. It was a moment of quiet connection, a silent thank you for all they'd been through. "You changed everything," she whispered. "You showed us what's possible." Behind her, a small crowd had gathered, tribal members, sanctuary volunteers, even a few reporters who'd stayed to cover the herd's arrival. One, a young woman with a notepad, called out, "Dr. Whitefeather, what's next for Thunderheart?" Lila turned, her hand still resting on Thunderheart's flank. "He's home," she said, her voice carrying over the prairie. "But his story isn't just about him. It's about what we do next, protecting the land, the animals, stopping the people who'd exploit them. He's a reminder we can do better." The reporter scribbled furiously, and Lila felt a surge of hope. Thunderheart's story was rippling outward, inspiring school groups, conservationists, even policymakers. The sanctuary was already planning educational programs, and the Blackfeet elders were working with Lila to incorporate traditional knowledge into its mission. Thunderheart wasn't just a buffalo, he was a catalyst. As the sun climbed higher, Lila stepped back, letting Thunderheart rejoin his herd. They moved together, their hooves a steady drumbeat on the earth, their silhouettes stark against the golden grass. Lila's phone buzzed, a message from Sarah, with a photo of Ember and Ash playing in their rehab enclosure. "They're fighters, like him," the message read. Lila smiled, her heart full. But as she turned to leave, Dan's truck pulled up, his face grim. "Lila," he called, stepping out. "We got a lead on Horizon Exotics. Another drop site, not far from here. They're not done." Lila's jaw tightened. She looked back at Thunderheart, now grazing peacefully with his herd, his strength a quiet promise. The fight wasn't over, but neither was their resolve. She'd protect him, the cubs, and every creature threatened by those who saw life as a commodity. Thunderheart had shown her what was possible, a world where compassion crossed boundaries, where a buffalo could change everything. And she wasn't about to let that go. It had been 3 months since the night in the canyon, when Thunderheart's bellows had echoed through the storm, his body a shield for 2 tiger cubs and a wounded woman. The sanctuary, now officially named Thinii Haven in his honor, had grown into a beacon of hope. Its 500 acres teemed with life, buffalo, pronghorn, and native grasses restored to their ancient rhythm. Thunderheart, the guardian spirit, was its heart. School groups visited weekly, their laughter mingling with the elders' stories of Thinii as a symbol of resilience and connection to the land. A plaque at the entrance bore his name, engraved beneath a carving of a buffalo standing over 2 tiger cubs, a testament to his extraordinary compassion. Lila's life had transformed alongside the sanctuary. She'd once been content in solitude, her days spent tracking herds and scribbling field notes. But Thunderheart's trust, his choice to protect the vulnerable, had awakened a fire in her. She'd become a voice for conservation, speaking at tribal councils, state hearings, and even a national wildlife conference. Her words carried Thunderheart's story, urging protection for the plains and the creatures that called it home. The Blackfeet Nation had embraced her vision, blending traditional knowledge with modern science to make Thinii Haven a model for restoration. Dr. Marcus Reed's research on Thunderheart's behavior had sparked global interest, with papers citing his empathy as evidence of complex cognition in buffalo. A new conservation bill, inspired by his story, was gaining traction in Congress, promising stricter penalties for wildlife trafficking. The fight against Horizon Exotics had yielded results, too. Sheriff Dan Carver's investigation, fueled by the manifest Lila found, had led to raids on 2 smuggling hubs. Several low-level operatives were in custody, though the ringleaders remained elusive. Sarah, now a fierce advocate, had joined forces with Lila, using her research to expose the network's reach. The tiger cubs, Ember and Ash, were thriving in their Colorado rehab center, their playful antics shared in viral videos that credited Thunderheart as their savior. Their story had galvanized public support, with donations flooding in to support Thinii Haven and anti-poaching efforts. Lila walked toward Thunderheart, her boots crunching on the dry grass, the scent of sagebrush sharp in the air. The herd parted as she approached, their eyes calm and knowing. Thunderheart lifted his head, his deep bellow rolling through the valley like a heartbeat. She stopped a few feet away, her hand outstretched, and he stepped closer, his massive head lowering to meet her touch. His coat was warm, coarse under her fingers, and he let out a soft huff, his breath warm against her palm. It was a ritual now, this quiet moment of connection, a reminder of the bond forged in the storm. "You showed us what's possible," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You showed me." Thunderheart's eyes, dark and endless, held hers, and for a moment, the world was still. Just the two of them, the prairie, and the fading light. Behind her, a small group gathered, elders, volunteers, and a few reporters who'd stayed to document the sanctuary's progress. An elder, Clara Two Bears, stepped forward, her silver braid catching the sunset. "He's more than a buffalo," she said, her voice carrying the weight of generations. "He's a teacher, a bridge between worlds. We honor him by protecting what he fought for." Lila nodded, her throat tight. She thought of her grandfather, his stories of Thinii as the lifeblood of the plains, and felt his presence in this moment. Thunderheart had taught her to see beyond science, to feel the land's pulse, to fight for its future. She turned to the group, her voice steady. "This isn't just his story," she said. "It's ours. It's about what we choose to protect, what we choose to fight for. He showed us compassion crosses boundaries, species, cultures, time. Let's carry that forward." The reporters scribbled, their cameras clicking, but Lila's words weren't for them alone. They were for everyone who'd heard Thunderheart's story, who'd seen his image and felt their hearts stir. She thought of the children who visited, wide-eyed as they watched him graze, of the policymakers debating the conservation bill, of Sarah, fighting to dismantle trafficking networks. Thunderheart's legacy was a ripple, spreading far beyond this prairie. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Lila walked back to the fence, Thunderheart's bellow echoing behind her. She paused, looking out at the vast, rolling land, its beauty fierce and fragile. She thought of the cubs, of Sarah, of the countless creatures still at risk from greed and indifference. And she thought of you, the reader, who might hear this story and feel its weight. What will you do with it? Have you ever witnessed an animal's courage, its intelligence, and felt your perspective shift? Thunderheart's story is a call, a reminder that compassion is a force, that one act of bravery can change the world. Support the sanctuaries that protect creatures like him. Share his story. Fight for the wild places that hold our past and our future. Ask yourself, what boundaries can your compassion cross? Lila touched the plaque at the sanctuary's gate, her fingers tracing Thunderheart's name. The prairie stretched before her, alive with possibility, and she knew this was only the beginning. Thunderheart had shown her the power of unexpected connections, and she would carry that lesson forward, always.